Okay, I've got 9 o'clock, so welcome everyone. I know we've got quite a few more people who haven't quite signed on yet, so hopefully they'll join us in a moment. First, let me just really briefly introduce myself and give a quick introduction to kind of what we're doing today, and then I want to get into it because it's an awful lot to try to cover in an hour. So my name's Jeff Tarrant. I'm the director of the NeuroMeditation Institute. We're located in Eugene, Oregon. I'm a licensed psychologist. I'm also board certified in neurofeedback. And the topic today apparently struck a chord because we had more people sign up for this webinar than I think anything we've ever done. So apparently there is something about this topic that resonated with a lot of folks. So hopefully we're able to provide something that's useful to everyone. I know we have a wide range of backgrounds with people who are attending this. So hopefully it's something that you can use with yourself or with others. A couple of just housekeeping things real quick. Because we're going to have a lot of people on the call, we're not going to be able to have folks unmuted, unfortunately. It'd just be too much to try to track. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end if people have questions or answers. I'll do my best to save a few minutes that you can kind of type in and we can address it that way. Also, this is going to be recorded, so you'll be able to access this afterward, either to rewatch or to share with folks. Or if you have to log off early. I know somebody just commented that they have to log out a few minutes early, so not a problem if you want to see the ending. And I will also be following up with kind of an email to everyone who's on this call, just with some additional details concerning some of the content in case you're interested in that. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So it helps if the slide moves. There we go. So first off, I really wanted to kind of get right away into a simplified version of what is actually happening in a stress response and why it's making it so difficult at this time to actually engage in the practices that we have, that we know that work, right? Pretty much, if you've signed up for this webinar, you probably have some sort of a meditation practice. And so many people right now are finding it extraordinarily difficult to maintain their normal practice. And this makes sense. It's actually a normal response to a difficult situation. Hang on one second here. I saw Phyllis raise your hand. If you've got a question or something, go ahead and write it in the little Q&A box or in the comment box, and I'll see if I can help you. From a stress physiology kind of perspective, one of the things that there's two different ways that our physiology can be activated based on a stress response. There's kind of the fast approach, which if there's an immediate threat, your system just automatically kicks into stress gear to protect you and take care of you. The high road, which is mostly what we're going to be dealing with, is the result of some sort of an appraisal. There's some sort of a cognitive understanding or interpretation of events that are happening in your environment. So something happens, your brain interprets it as a potential threat, and so then it activates this stress response. So obviously this is a very real thing that's happening for us right now, right? Because we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so I have this slide up for a reason, not to sort of create additional stress, but this is the kind of stuff that we are seeing on a nonstop basis right now. These kinds of charts and information. And so there's an appraisal that takes place. The brain is interpreting this as a threat. Of course, it is a threat. But then what we do with that, how the mind translates that, creates a a stress response. It dumps a bunch of cortisol in the system, activates the sympathetic nervous system. Now, this is a normal response. It's what should happen. It's how we're designed. And in fact, one particular part of the brain that's very much involved in this is the amygdala. There's actually lots of parts of the brain that are involved in this process, but we're only going to have time to get into sort of a shortened, abbreviated version today. So the amygdala, you can kind of see it highlighted on this slide. It's a deeper brain structure. It's part of the limbic system. Bessel van der Kolk talks about it as a smoke detector. That's its job, right? Is it alerts you to any potential dangers in the environment. So the amygdala is scanning the environment, looking for anything that's a potential threat. That's its job. And it's a more basic function in the brain. So its job is to keep you safe. So it's constantly scanning, looking for anything that might be a potential threat. So once it does that, if it identifies something, activates the nervous system so that you can deal with it. So this is where the fight or flight idea comes in, is that the amygdala identifies a threat, activates the nervous system so that you can either get away from it or fight it or do something else. So what is happening though is that our amygdala is sort of on hyper alert at the moment. We're constantly seeing cues in the environment that are creating this stress response, and they're not going away. So let me demonstrate this just a little bit with a couple of slides. So this is kind of how we think of the stress response is supposed to work, right? You're kind of hanging out at baseline. So here you are, you're cruising around your level of arousal. Something happens. Now, when we think of it this way, it is a discrete stressor. Something in the environment happens that we perceive as a threat, and so our system kicks into gear. So the example that you see all the time, and different people who have written about this, or if you are walking in the backyard and there's a twig over there, and you see it out of the corner of your eye and think it's a snake, your brain interprets the shape as a snake, and you have an immediate stress response. Something happens, your physiology kicks into gear to protect you, right? But then a moment later, that appraisal, you recognize that it's not a threat. It's just a stick. It's no big deal. So your nervous system drops back into more of a sort of a parasympathetic little rebound, and then you're kind of back to baseline. This is the way it's supposed to work. Or even if it was a real threat. So something happens, maybe you're walking down the street at night and you see a shady character kind of walking toward you. Perceive that as a threat, and maybe you decide to run away. You run away, you get away from the situation, you get back to your car or whatever, the situation is resolved. So after a few moments, the situation goes away and you're kind of back to baseline. That's the way it's designed, is for it to handle an immediate situation and to get back to baseline. We're not designed to hang out in a stress response for prolonged periods. It's very energetically taxing. It wears the system out. But that's exactly what's going on right now, is we're in a situation where there is no resolution to this stressor. There's a stressor that's happening, but we can't see it. We don't know where it is, So obviously I'm talking about the current pandemic, COVID-19, that, some people are asymptomatic. There's a range of symptoms. You can't see it. You don't know where it is. It could be everywhere. There's inconsistent information. The medical experts don't agree. The politicians don't agree. Everybody's got different opinions. So we don't know what to do in order to resolve this. In fact, there's not much we can do, right? There's no resolution in sight. We don't know when this is going to end. So all of this uncertainty, there's a stressor, but there's no way to resolve it. So what's happening is that we're essentially getting stuck in this chronic stress response, and there's no way to get out of it. So this is the problem, and this is why it's so difficult to find a state of balance in order to get into that sort of meditative state that we all long for and we know would be really helpful. So this concept right here is a really important one. It's a very busy slide, but it's really good actually, because what it's demonstrating is that when we enter into a stress response, what's happening is that we're moving out of our window of tolerance. So there's kind of a state of arousal that's ideal for each of us, right? You don't want to be over aroused, but you also don't want to be under aroused. So there's a nice little window in the middle that is where we feel balanced. That's where we want to stay. Now, what happens in a stress response, what we think of and what we just talked about, is that our arousal gets shifted out of this window into a sympathetic activation. This is the fight or flight. And you see a bunch of things up here, right? Anxiety or panic, startled easily, can't relax, feeling restless. You might look at this list and you might relate to some of these. But what I also want to point out is that for some people, when they're in a stress response, it could be acute or it could be chronic, they actually shift down into this parasympathetic response. And so this can look like sort of a freeze or a fawn response. So depression, feeling flat, apathetic, lethargic. So now when you look at this, what's really important about this is to start to recognize where am I? Where am I right now? Where do I tend to hang out? When I'm stressed, do I tend to go into sympathetic activation? Do I tend to go into parasympathetic? And by the way, it's not uncommon to do both. Sometimes you're up here, sometimes you're down here. But using this as kind of a way to examine your current situation or the people that you work with can be super useful as a way to just kind of evaluate your current status. So we're going to come back to this throughout the rest of this talk, because kind of where we're going with this is, okay, great. If we can kind of understand this, what can we do in order to modulate this, kind of help ourselves stay in that window? So we basically have two choices here, which of course aren't mutually exclusive. You could do both at the same time. So we can either do something to get ourselves back into that window. So if we're over aroused or under aroused, do something to get ourselves back into the window and then do our meditation. That's one approach. Or we can adapt our meditation practice, because clearly it's very difficult for many of us to do our traditional seated meditation practice. You know, you sit down on your cushion and you close your eyes, and all that happens is you ruminate and brood and worry. And that's not really meditation. And so you may have to adapt your practice. So for the rest of this conversation, we are going to be looking at a variety of strategies that involve one or both of these. So the first thing that I think is really critical is this idea of recognition, recognizing kind of where you're at. So we talked about that window of tolerance. And so when I'm working with students or with clients, you know, to really be able to help them understand and to evaluate, what is the very first indication that you're moving out of your window of tolerance? You know, if you're moving toward a over-aroused state, somebody might feel fidgety or agitated or frustrated, impatient. So I can recognize this in myself, right? It's like I can recognize when my stress level gets too high, I get annoyed easily, right? So that's a clue that I'm moving out of my window. But what's the very earliest indication? Can you keep backing it up until you get the first clue that, uh-oh, I'm moving into sort of dangerous territory here where I'm not balanced? Or the other way, if you're shifting into a low arousal, if you're feeling vague or spaced out. So again, for me, when I start moving into this direction, I get really tired. I could have had a great night's sleep, everything, you know, but then all of a sudden I just want to go to sleep. So for me, this is that clue that's like, uh-oh, this is a stress response. Something is going on that's kind of downshifting my nervous system. So being able to kind of clue into this is going to be extremely important, because if you don't recognize the fact that you are moving out of your window of tolerance, you're not going to be able to do anything about it. So, and by the way, you can already kind of recognize in this step that this is actually kind of a mindfulness practice, because you're paying attention to what's going on in the present moment, which is what mindfulness is, noticing what's happening right now. So actually, even taking this step can become part of a meditation practice. Now, this might be hard to do, right? It might be hard to just, oh, I'm just going to observe what's going on moment to moment throughout the day and see how I am in my window of tolerance. That may not be possible, right? The mind may be so over aroused or overactivated that it may be very difficult to do that in a more organic way. So another option is to actually be very intentional about it and use some tools to assist you in the process. So one of the tools that I really like for this, it's a phone app. It's free. It's actually called Mind Bell. And basically, it's a little meditation timer, little meditation bell that you can set to go off throughout the day. So there's all kinds of controls you can see on this slide so that you can make sure it doesn't go off when you're on a phone call or whatever. You can tell it how often you want it to go off. I like setting mine so that it goes off about once an hour throughout the day. And when it goes off, that is a opportunity to pause and check in and reflect. Where are you right now? Where are you in your window of tolerance? Are you over aroused? Are you under aroused? So noticing what's going on with your body, what's going on with your breathing, with your emotions, with your thinking. Again, it's a mindfulness opportunity, but we're using it to sort of check in terms of evaluating where we're at in that window of tolerance. So something like this is a great tool. You might, also think of other ways to approach this as well, which would be something like, if you have appointments all day long, in between each appointment, intentionally taking 2 minutes to stop and check in. So that's actually a practice that I've done in the past when I had a very busy schedule and was seeing a lot of individual clients. I would make sure I had a few minutes in between to check in, do a little bit of easy movement, and kind of recalibrate. So anyway, this is step one. It's kind of recognizing. Now, the second step is to reduce the stressors. Now, on the outset, that might sound crazy in this current context. Obviously, you can't get rid of the coronavirus. And that's actually not what I'm saying here. What I'm actually talking about are all of the things that feed that stress response. Because it's actually, part of the stress response is the real threat. Part of the stress response is how we're thinking about it. How we're thinking about it, how we're interpreting it, how we're perceiving it, how we're paying attention to it. That's all internal. That's all in our head. And we do have some control over that. We can start to reduce the things in our environment that feed that stress response. So, what keeps us in this active stress response? What keeps it a chronic pattern for us? So really, again, this is another kind of recognition aspect. Examining what it is that you do, how you think, what you pay attention to, what's going on in your environment that actually feeds the stress response, and what can we eliminate? What can we work with? So there's a couple of ideas here. The first is a pretty important one. And really, it's this idea of a media diet. How does what you're viewing influence your stress response? So again, this is another mindfulness exercise, right? So when you check the news, what happens in the body? Notice. How does that affect your breathing? How does it affect your tension? What happens to how you're feeling? What about when you check Facebook? What happens, right? So this is kind of connected to that first one, recognizing how do these different media influences affect you? How is it activating your stress response? And then again, kind of looking at yourself. How often are you checking the news or social media? This is a tricky one, right? Because, there's this major thing going on in the world, and it's very tempting to stay on news to stay on social media. I can't even tell you how many people I've talked to about this in the last 3 or 4 weeks. This sort of recognition that people feel compelled to continually check on what's happening right now. And, so part of it, we have to be aware of what our habits are. How often are you checking these things? What's going on? And then to evaluate it. Is all that checking providing any useful additional information? Maybe sometimes it is, but I would venture to bet most of the time it's not. Most of the time when you're checking the news, it's just a repetition of what you already know, or it's somebody's opinion. And, so if that's the case, is that adding useful information, or is it creating agitation and fear? So this is a really important question to examine. And once you kind of identify that, it's like, okay, what are the aspects that are not helpful? How can you minimize that? If it's just adding stress and it's not adding benefit, then what can we do about it? Here's some tips. And by the way, the cat in the container isn't completely irrelevant. That'll come up in a second. So, a couple of things to consider, right? Before bed, see if you can stay off of the news, stay off of your email, stay off of social media at least an hour before bed, preferably 2 hours. Think about it. What the last thing that you're exposing yourself to that's cruising around in your brain, that's what's going to be swimming around up there for these 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 hours that you're unconscious. So see if you can reduce that. Try to get a good night's sleep. Same thing in the morning. A lot of times people wake up in the morning and the very first thing they do is check their phones. Okay, probably not the greatest idea, especially in the current state of things. So can you wait? Do your practice first. This is something I've had to actually work on myself. I just somehow got into the habit of I'd get up in the morning, I'd make my coffee, I'd check my phone, check my email, check Facebook, and then I would go do my meditation practice. And what I found was that it was agitating me, checking my email and checking Facebook before meditation. And it was actually making it difficult for me to really fully engage. So I've had to very intentionally decide that I'm not going to do that. Meditation is first, and then I'll check, social media and whatever before I go to work. And I've got go to work in quotes because for some of us that means going to the kitchen table, or for me it means going to the spare bedroom. That's where I'm at right now. So creating a routine or a schedule. So, again, this is sort of making a conscious choice about when and how you're going to check the news, check social media. So, checking it one time a day and limiting your time, something like that, so that you're getting the information, so that that part of your brain isn't worried you're missing something important. You're checking the information, but you're also limiting your exposure to it. Finding other ways to take a break. And now this one is really important because what I'm noticing with a lot of folks right now is that they are checking the news and checking social media when they need a break during the day. And unfortunately, that's not really much of a break, right? It's just creating more stress. So I know some people who've been taking a social media vacation. So they just won't log on for a week or 2 weeks or a month. The other thing is to find something else to do if you need a break. If you're in the middle of your workday and your workday is in your spare bedroom, there's not other people to talk to. You can't go to the water cooler. There's nothing else to do. So we keep surfing around on our computers. So maybe get out of the room, go take a walk around the block, move your body. Or if you really want to stay on your computer, watch a funny cat video instead of social media, which is why I've got the picture of the cat in the Tupperware box. All right. So the first two, we got recognize and we've got reduce. So I'm going with these R's. I'm trying to make everything fit into an R. The 5 R's is what we're going to be covering here. So reframe is the next one. So this image that I've got on here, literally I went into Google and I typed in the search bar, meditate. You can actually see it there on the screen, and took a screenshot of what came up. And, I thought that was very interesting because there are some stereotypical images that show up, not just on Google, but in our brains when we think of meditation. Meditation means a certain thing, right? It looks a certain way. And it's very obvious on here, right? Usually you see, if you Google and you look around, and actually you can even see it on this image, women sitting on a beach, with their hands in a particular mudra. It's like the stereotypical image. One of the things I think is really important, especially in circumstances like what we're in right now, is to remember that meditation is not really about how you sit. It's not about what you wear. It's not about where you are. Meditation is really about your state of consciousness. Now, are there reasons to sit and kind of engage in kind of a traditional format for meditation? Of course. That can be very powerful, very helpful. And the whole reason we're having this webinar is because many of us are having trouble doing that. So it doesn't mean abandon that idea, but it also means, can we shift our expectations? Can we expand the way that we think about meditation? And remember that it's really about how you're paying attention. So we were kind of bringing that up earlier, right? So even that idea of checking in and looking at where you're at in your window of tolerance, that is a meditative practice. That is a mindfulness practice. It doesn't look like these images, but it's about where your mind is. How are you paying attention? What is your perception? So being flexible, being patient with ourselves, being compassionate with ourselves, recognizing that this is a very unusual set of circumstances that we're in. It's very challenging. Everybody is struggling right now. Everybody. I don't know a single person that's not struggling. So being compassionate with ourselves, that this is a difficult time. It's a difficult situation. And so it's not going to be perfect. And then maybe considering smaller time increments, right? If you're used to meditating for 30 minutes, maybe that's too much right now. So maybe breaking it up. The reality is that consistent practice, even if it's a small amount of time, is actually more important than doing big, massive, hour-long meditations. As long as you stick with it. So stay with it, even if it's small. That's great. So I put this definition up because, again, this idea of reframing how we're thinking about meditation, what meditation is. The definition that I like using is this one. It's a systematic mental training designed to challenge habits of attending, thinking, feeling, and perceiving. Now, this isn't the only definition of meditation, but I like this definition because what it really points out is that a lot of what we're doing in a meditative practice is shifting the way that we pay attention. How are you paying attention? How are you thinking? How are you feeling? How are you perceiving? And shifting that away from the habitual ways that we do these things. So this is exactly what we've been talking about, right? Everything that we've been talking about so far is doing this. We're shifting our attention away from whatever the stress, rumination, worry response is into something different. So again, doesn't necessarily have to look like sitting on a meditation cushion. So I wanted to bring up this idea, right? That a lot of things can be meditation or can be mindfulness that we don't necessarily think of that way. And grounding exercises is a perfect example and can be super useful to help get you back into your window of tolerance. So what is grounding? So grounding is really any strategy that uses a return to the present moment awareness to focus externally, right? So think about it. A lot of times when we're getting caught in a stress response, we are kind of in our heads or in our hearts. We're thinking about things, we're worrying. Think about what worry is, actually. Worry is largely a repetition of the same thought and the same feeling over and over and over and over again. You're just repeating the same thing over and over again. And it's in here and in here. So what we're talking about is shifting out of that, shifting your attention externally and bringing it to the present moment. Now, this is helpful for many reasons, but a lot of the things when we are caught in kind of an anxiety loop, a lot of it is about what's connected to our fears about what's going to happen in the future or something that has already happened, so something from the past. Most of the time, if we pay attention to what's going on right now, right in this exact moment, we can recognize that actually right now we're okay. In this exact second, we are okay. So if we can come to the present moment, shift our attention externally, this is what grounding is, can be very, very helpful to shift out of that stress and anxiety response. And this really is mindfulness, becoming, shifting to the present moment, to what's happening right now, and using your senses to assist in that process. So grounding is mindfulness. Now, one of the concepts that comes up a lot, this is a Buddhist concept, but it comes up very often, which is that mindfulness begins with the body. The mind is very good at going to the future or the past. In fact, the mind is very rarely in the present moment. It's always somewhere else. And the reality is that you can't be in two places at the same time. You kind of have to choose, where am I going to be? The body can only be in the present moment. I've got an asterisk there because it gets a little complicated when you're talking about trauma related issues. But for the purposes of our conversation today, the body can only be in the present moment, right? It's right here. It's now. So if you can bring your attention to the body, what's happening in the body, or using your senses, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, it's bringing you into this moment right now. And in fact, even when I talk about this with people, and this may have happened to you as you were listening to me talk, if you shifted your attention into your body while I was talking to you, or maybe you're doing it now, recognize that when that happens, something changes, right? Your perspective changes. And isn't it funny that it's like, oh, wow, I have a body. Like we have to shift our attention to even recognize that we have a body. And that's because so much of the time we're in our heads or in our hearts. So how do we get just embodied into what's going on right now? So here's a few tips for things that you might experiment with grounding. And again, so this could be used both ways that we talked about at the beginning. This could be used to help rebalance yourself before you meditate, or this could actually become part of your meditation, right? So walking, stretching, exercising, and focusing on the movement and the sensory details. So you can do a walking meditation, Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, or just taking a walk or stretching. It doesn't have to be a formal thing, right? So you could do any kind of an activity, but really tuning into what's going on right now. What does it feel like with your feet on the ground? What does it feel like when your muscles move as you walk? What do you notice with your senses? The trees, the colors, the breeze, the sound of the birds. It's bringing you into the present moment. Another exercise that's very common is, you'll see variations of this, but again, using your senses. Can you identify 4 things that you can see right now? 3 things you can touch, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Again, you're just using your senses to become oriented to the present moment. The third one I really like, putting your hand over your heart and a hand on your belly. So again, when you kind of come in physical contact with your own body, it really brings you into this moment. So you can cross the hands over the chest, put 1 hand on the chest, 1 on the belly, take a few slow breaths. Anything like that can be very grounding. There's actually some good exercises in brain gym as well. Any of you who might be familiar with that system, I haven't seen that around for a while, but There's some very grounding techniques in there. Eating something, again, you're just using your senses, right, to kind of like help you get into the body. Chewing, tasting can help do that. And then the last one might be my favorite, sitting or lying on the ground outside. So literally connecting with the earth. There's actually a physiological process that happens when you come in direct contact with the earth, like this image that we have here. So being barefoot in the grass or dirt, rocks, whatever. It literally grounds you. Electrically, it grounds you. So there's a lot of benefits physiologically that happen simply by coming in contact with the earth, but there's also some pretty profound psychological and emotional benefits as well. In fact, I just recommended this to somebody I've been working with who was really struggling with this idea of kind of staying in the window. And this became one of their go-to interventions when they found themselves moving out of that window. So if they couldn't do some of the other things that we're going to talk about or that you've shared, they could do this. Go outside, stick your feet on the ground, take off your socks and shoes, notice the feel of the sun on your skin, connect to the earth. Very, very simple, very powerful. Okay. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to have time to take you through any exercises. Big shock. Those of you that know me know that I'm notorious for having too much material. But I'll tell you kind of what I had in mind very quickly so that you can maybe experiment with this on your own. It's a simple exercise. And I've actually seen this a few different ways, and most recently saw it on a Netflix TV show called Midnight Gospel. Some of you might have seen that. Essentially, what you are doing is noticing the inside of your fingers. So can you tune into what it feels like inside of your index finger? Maybe just start with one index finger and kind of putting your attention on the inside of that finger. So relaxing the body, relaxing the fingers, relaxing the hands, noticing what's happening inside that index finger, not on the surface, inside. And if you really start to relax into it and notice, you'll notice some interesting sensations, which then you can experiment with expanding that into additional fingers or into both hands and up the arms. Can you extend that feeling of being in your body to the entirety of your body? It takes a little bit of practice, but as soon as you do it, and again, if you were kind of playing with this while I was talking, you might have noticed a shift in your consciousness. It kind of takes you out of your head because you're literally in your body. So it's kind of a variation of a body scan or progressive muscle relaxation. Has a very different feel for me. So any of you that have ever done any energy work or kind of Qigong kinds of energy work, you might recognize some of those sensations. So anyway, it's a good experiment. It's a good exercise to kind of play with. And again, it can shift you very quickly. You could do that for 2 minutes and it takes you out of your head for that small amount of time, which can be extremely valuable and powerful. Okay, the next R, respirate. I could have just said breathe, but then I'd mess up my R thing that I got going on. So breathing is obviously an extremely powerful tool to shift your nervous system. So when you look at the ancient yogic and other systems, right, that have really explored breath work, there's a bazillion different kinds of ways to engage in breathing exercises. Why are there so many? Well, they're designed to help you get into different states of consciousness. And I listed some other things that have kind of come up more recently. You know, everybody's heard of belly breathing. Probably everybody's heard of cyclic breathing. Pranayama is an entire system. And then you've got things like holotropic breath work and Wim Hof. There's a Soma breathwork program I've been working with for the last couple of years. Some of those are designed to shift you into a non-ordinary state of consciousness. which might be a little bit more than kind of beyond the scope of what we're trying to do today, right? It's a kind of a different purpose. But I'm bringing it up because it's important when you're looking at using breath work to examine what is the point of this breath work exercise. Where is it trying to take my state of consciousness? What am I doing? And is it a good match? So we're not just doing a breath exercise for the sake of doing a breath exercise. It has to sort of be consistent. So really, for these purposes, what I'm usually most interested in is sort of a balanced breathing. So coordinating the inhale and the exhale so that they are even, so that they're the same. So that if I'm inhaling to a count of 4, I'm exhaling to a count of 4. What that tends to do is create balance in the nervous system, because your inhalation is connected to the sympathetic nervous system, and your exhalation is connected to the parasympathetic nervous system. And so what I want is a balance, right? I want to be in that window. I want to be in the middle. I don't want to be too far on one side or the other. So one of the strategies that can work really well to assist with this is using some sort of an external breath pacer. So this is one that I've used for a very long time. It's called Do As One. It's a free website. So www.doasone.com. Here's a couple of images. Those are actually old images. I'm actually going to show you real quick what it looks like. I'm going to bring it up real fast here. So here's what the site looks like. And they used to have a lot of different rooms. Now they've just really got this world breathing room. And when you go in here, it gives you some basic instructions. And what's going to happen when it kind of finishes up the instructions is it will provide a way to track your breathing at about 6 breaths per minute, which for most people is kind of an ideal balanced breathing rate. Now, the thing that's also kind of cool about this is there's a little map down at the bottom that shows everybody in the world who's logged in right now. So there's somebody in Belarus right now that's logged in. Got a few people in the United States. Here's me over here in Oregon somewhere. So it's kind of fun because you can kind of see that there are other people breathing with you, right? So do as one. So now you can see the breath pacer. It's counting down, and it's just a simple little teardrop image that expands and contracts with your breathing. There's also a little, you can hear the breathing in the background. So there's a little bit of an audio to go with it, which is nice if you want to do it with your eyes closed. So it's a pleasant, simple image that can help you really slow down your breathing and keep it paced so that you know that you're actually doing a rhythmic, consistent, balanced breath exercise. Now, one of the things that's a little bit of a bummer about this current website, they've kind of gotten rid of some of their options. And, but beyond that, you can't really control how slow or fast this is going. It's just going to hold this pace. And it's doing that because, again, it's kind of this do as one concept, right? We're all breathing together. But the reality is that, some people are going to need to breathe a little bit faster or a little bit slower, depending on their specific physiology and their specific needs. Let me go back there for 1 second. Close that because of the breathing sound. Okay. Get back here. So that's one option, is to use something like that. I like it because it's visually appealing, it's free, it's easy to access. It literally, if you go on your smartphone and you type into the store external breathing or paced breathing, kind of choose those keywords, you'll find about a dozen apps that are available. Many of them are free, and many of them, most of them, allow you to alter the breathing rate. So you can put it where you want. So if 6 breaths per minute is too slow, you can go a little bit faster, 7 breaths per minute. But for most people, that range of 5 to 7 breaths per minute is kind of the ideal place to create balance in your nervous system. There's actually a lot that goes on there, a little bit beyond the scope of our conversation today, but that's kind of where we're wanting to get. Again, if it feels uncomfortable to breathe that slow, then work at it gradually. Don't just go there immediately. Start a little bit faster and then work your way down. So additional strategies that can be very useful and powerful are doing alternate nostril breathing. Again, if you've never done this before, you can find, dozens of examples on YouTube. This is a yogic practice, and it actually is also in some Qigong and Taoist practices as well. And this is also a really great way to kind of balance your nervous system, and it can do it very quickly. The other thing I wanted to point out was I was mentioning that different ways that you use your breath can influence your nervous system in different ways. So if you are not necessarily looking for balance, but maybe you're under aroused, you're kind of caught in that parasympathetic mode, then actually you can do certain kinds of breathing, like rapid breathing. It actually increases your sympathetic arousal. So you can use your breath to bring you up out of that parasympathetic mode. If you're feeling lethargic or heavy or foggy, you can use certain kinds of breathing to bring you up. You can also use it to bring you down. So you'll hear sometimes in instructions people saying to focus on the exhalation or make the exhalation longer than the inhalation. So when you do that, if you make the exhalation longer, you're emphasizing the parasympathetic. Because remember, inhale is connected to sympathetic, exhale is connected to parasympathetic. So you can manipulate your breathing to help get you into that window, to get you into your state. And of course, any of these practices could be part of your meditation. So again, you could use it as a tool to help you get into your window, or you could make it part of your meditation practice, simply doing your breathing this way. Okay, run. Again, try to keep the R's. Or don't run, or do something else. But the idea here is to use your body. Again, we've talked about focusing on your body, things like grounding, other exercises where you're kind of tuning in, that presence exercise, feeling into the body. But I'm talking about exerting yourself in some way. So there's a couple of different ways that you might use this approach. So one, think about what's happening if there's a stress response. Your system is activating for you to respond, for you to do something. And if you're just sitting there staring at your computer, there's no way for all of those stress hormones that are built up in your body to get metabolized. So literally they just sit and stew in your system. You have to do something. You have to be active in order to metabolize and burn up all of that stress, literally. So, finding a way to become more active. So yes, you can run, you can do jumping jacks, you can do push-ups. It doesn't matter. You just want to get your heart rate up. Even 5 minutes can make a big difference. This is another thing I've been trying to put into my routine, since I can't go to the gym right now. So it's like, well, what are other ways I can get my heart rate up? I will often do this in the morning before my meditation. I'll also try to do it at some other point in the day, simply as a way to kind of help my nervous system stay in balance. Now, just as kind of an encourager, I really just put this slide in here to kind of increase your motivation. So we know that physical exercise actually increases all of the neurochemicals that we all love, right? Dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. These things are associated with improvements in mood, improvements in attention, learning and memory. Physical exercise increases brain blood flow and oxygen. So there's so many benefits to exercise that if there's any way to increase or incorporate exercise into what you're doing, that can be super, super, super helpful. And then, of course, you could make movement your practice. So this is actually one of my favorite ways to practice, and especially since for the last 2 months, since with the stay-at-home orders and kind of restrictions on things and my increased stress level, this has been my primary practice, is using some simple Qigong exercises or Tai Chi, or if you're a yoga person, you can use yoga, really any kind of mindful movement. And there's a variety of these kinds of things, right? And again, there's so much instruction available online that you don't have to go to a class in order to kind of explore some of this. In fact, when I send you the follow-up email, I'll send you a few links of some exercises that you might try if you're interested in this. This type of practice is really useful for a lot of reasons, but the movements themselves are smooth and rhythmic. You're coordinating your mind and your body. The body is in balance. And we are a mind body. The mind and the body are not different things. They're the same thing. If you affect the mind, you affect the body. If you affect the body, you affect the mind. So if you can get the body to be coordinated, balanced, smooth, relaxed, grounded, the mind is going to have those same characteristics. In fact, one of the reasons that I'm such a big fan of Qigong is one of my primary teachers, he would always say, this is Ken Cohen, he would frequently say, if a movement requires 4 ounces of energy, don't use 5. That extra ounce of energy that you're using is stress. And I just love that saying, and it's stuck with me ever since. It applies to physical movement. If a physical movement only requires a certain amount of energy, don't use more. But it also applies to mental energy and emotional energy. So if a certain thought requires a certain amount of effort, don't use more than that. Just use the minimum amount that you need. And it's such a great lesson for life. So, really starting to kind of engage with some of these movement practices can be very helpful. The other thing I like about this is it gives the mind something to do, right? So a lot of times if you sit to meditate and you're attempting to get into kind of a quiet mind state, that can be really challenging right now. So instead, give the mind something active to do that can be meditative. So engaging in movement, you have to pay attention to what's happening in the body, right? Or instead of doing a quiet mind type meditation, do something more like an open heart practice, where you're directing your attention and your intention in specific ways. Listen to a guided audio, something that can help you, right, stay on track with your practice. There's actually a lot of additional tools that we could talk about in terms of using technology or other kinds of interventions like that to facilitate the practice. So here's kind of what we've talked about, right? Here's the 5 R's. And actually I had a 6th R that I didn't put in here because I was afraid I was going to run out of time. So recognize, remember, paying attention, noticing if you're in your window or not. What are the first indicators that you're moving out of your window of tolerance? Reducing any kind of stimulation in your environment that might be adding to the stress that you have control over, social media, news, who you talk to, that sort of thing. Reframing, changing the way you're thinking about your meditation practice, shifting your expectations, being patient and kind and generous with yourself, remembering to breathe. So by the way, this goes beyond, doing some of the specific exercises we talked about, balanced breathing or cyclic breathing or, any of that. That's all great, but actually just remembering to breathe. Again, if you start really paying attention to yourself and noticing, what you might recognize is that there are times during the day when you're actually not breathing. You're literally holding your breath. And so if we can catch ourselves during those moments and, kind of remember to keep the breathing moving, super helpful, and then run, right? So using the body, exerting energy to break out of that stress response, or bringing it into your practice very directly in terms of, you know, some sort of movement-based practice. Again, could just be walking. It could just be a walking meditation. That could be great. Actually, you can make running a meditation. I used to work with a lot of athletes, and they would turn their run into a meditative practice. Great, perfect. Again, this goes back to the reframe. It doesn't have to look a certain way. Running can be your meditation. Gardening can be your meditation. It's about where your attention is and your intention. That's what defines what meditation is. So while I'm kind of wrapping this up, if there are any pressing questions or concerns, shoot me a little message. And I'll try to get to it here in just a moment. So if any of this seems appealing, you know, other things that you might kind of look at that we're kind of doing at the NeuroMeditation Institute. So, you know, we've got a book out that kind of provides some brain-based strategies for thinking about meditation. We're going to be offering some additional 4-week classes online that may be appealing. And then we've got some other things coming up, like some intensives, online intensives. We have a certification program. So if you're a professional and, you know, are really kind of drawn toward more of a brain-based clinical approach to meditation and how it can be used with specific populations, you might check that out. Here's our website. You know, there's also some resources on here that may be helpful. There's some Qigong videos, some guided meditations. There's also a neuromeditation styles inventory that you might find useful, which essentially asks you to fill out a short questionnaire and then kind of helps determine which styles of meditation might be a good fit based on your particular needs or concerns. All right. Nobody has sent me any messages, which, oh, there's one. I was going to say, that's amazing. Oh, they were just saying thanks. It was helpful. Okay, great. Very good. Great. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Excellent. So I don't see any questions. And I will wrap up here. Like I said, this video will be available on our YouTube channel. I think you'll also get an email from Zoom letting you know that it's available. And so, you know, you will have access to it again. Hopefully you can share with people you work with if that's a useful resource. And I hope to see you all in the future. Take care of yourselves, be safe and healthy. Thanks so much. If there's additional questions that pop up, I'll see if I can answer them in the email that I send out to everyone. All right, thank you all. Take care.